All right, let's pull back the curtain on one of the biggest but maybe most invisible forces shaping our world right now, the massive, and I mean massive, physical footprint of artificial intelligence. Just think about your day. Every single time you ask a chatbot a question, or you generate an image with an AI tool, or even use a voice assistant. Have you ever just stopped and wondered what's actually happening behind the screen? Where does that answer, or that picture, or that voice, where does it really come from? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into. Because it turns out that all that digital magic has a very real, very physical home. So it turns out the cloud isn't really up in the sky at all. It's on the ground inside these enormous buildings called data centers. I'm talking about giant warehouses just packed to the gills with thousands of super powerful computers all running 24/7. And the reason they're so huge is that AI needs way, way more computing power than, say, just loading a website. The calculations are thousands of times more intense. And this leads to a pretty huge problem. And that problem really starts with electricity. The amount of power these AI data centers need isn't just growing, it's absolutely exploding. The International Energy Agency has a projection that by 2030, global electricity demand from data centers could hit 945 terawatt hours. Now that's just a giant number, right? What does that even mean in the real world? Okay, to put that in perspective for you, we're talking about an amount of electricity that's pretty much what the entire nation of Japan uses in a year, and Japan is the world's third largest economy. All of that power just for our digital world, and it's being driven almost entirely by AI. And here in the US, the story is even crazier. So back in 2023, data centers used about 4.4% of the country's electricity. By 2028, that's just 5 years later, that share is expected to triple, maybe hitting 13 or even 14% of all US electricity. That kind of growth it's unheard of. And here's the real kicker. Our power grids just weren't built for this kind of sudden shock. I mean, upgrading transmission lines, building new power plants, that stuff takes years, sometimes a whole decade. But these AI data centers, they're going up in just 12 to 18 months. The demand is simply outrunning our ability to supply the power. But, electricity is only half of the story. All of those computers running nonstop generate an incredible amount of heat. And to cool them down, you need another critical resource, water. And I mean a lot of water. Some of the biggest data centers, especially the ones running these really intense AI jobs, can drink up to 5 million gallons of water in a single day. Let that sink in for a second. That's the same amount of water a city of 50,000 people would use in a day, all for one building just to keep its computers from melting. But not all of that water use is obvious. It really comes in two flavors. You've got direct use, that's the water used right there on site for the big cooling towers, but then there's indirect use, which is kind of the hidden water footprint from, say, generating all that electricity in the first place, and even from manufacturing the computer chips themselves. And this is the wild part. This hidden, indirect water use can actually make up 80% or even more of the total water footprint. It's this huge, often invisible cost that's happening all along the supply chain. So, okay, with this massive energy and water crunch happening, the pressure is really on to innovate. How in the world can we build a more sustainable AI? Let's look at two totally different scenarios. First, picture a data center in Phoenix, Arizona. It's hot, it's dry, and water is scarce. So that data center is literally competing with people for a precious resource. Now contrast that with a data center in northern Sweden. It can just use the cold outside air for free cooling. And get this, its waste heat can be piped into the local town's heating system. It turns a waste product into something valuable. So yeah, where you build really, really matters. And a whole toolkit of solutions is starting to emerge. We're seeing smarter decisions about where to build, in cooler climates. There's some amazing new tech like liquid immersion cooling, where servers are literally dunked in a special fluid to cool them down way more efficiently. Companies are figuring out how to reuse all that waste heat, and they're signing big contracts to make sure their facilities run on clean, renewable energy. So the technology for a greener AI, it's out there. But the billion-dollar question is, can we actually deploy it fast enough to keep up with AI's crazy growth? And the challenges are really significant. Our power grids, like we said, take forever to upgrade. Water is becoming more and more scarce in the very places these data centers are being built. Updating old facilities costs a fortune.
And renewables like wind and solar, well, they aren't on 24/7. On top of all that, a lot of companies still aren't being totally upfront about their energy and water use.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. AI has this incredible promise, right? To help us solve humanity's biggest challenges, everything from climate change to curing diseases. But its own environmental footprint is becoming a massive challenge in and of itself. So the question we really have to ask is, can we solve AI's resource problem before we ask it to go out and solve ours?